everyone, this is Sofia Smallstorm. I'm returning with a podcast, and my guest today is someone that I stumbled into, I don't even know how, and I mean online. She was giving a talk about her own experience living directly underneath a collection of cell antennas that had been mounted on the roof of an apartment building. And she had the top floor apartment, and within a very short time frame, her life completely changed, and not for the better. So I watched this. I was very taken with the way that this woman spoke. There was something about her being, her carriage, even in this two-dimensional medium. And I thought, I have to find her and I have to interview her and I want to ask her questions, because she's apparently gone through and beyond that phase of, you could say, body destruction, and she's come out the other side. So she's here today to talk to me and to all of you through this podcast. Her name is Veronica Ciandre. Hi, Veronica.
Hi, Sophia. How are you?
I am fine. I'm very excited to have you. It's going to be a very interesting show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So do you want to tell us what happened? I know I kind of already gave a short summary, but when did you know that something was wrong?
So in about November of 2009, a really large truck pulled up outside of my building and started loading things onto the roof. So everything they were loading was coming very close to my balcony. It's kind of ominous. And I asked the superintendent what was happening, and he told me they were putting cell antennas on the roof of the building, and that it would it helps you get better cell phone reception. Not that anyone was having any problem with their cell phone reception, but I kind of, ignored it. It didn't sound like anything I needed to be worried about. But a few days later, just hearing the noise on the roof, it was so much noise, and I know that it's an older building. It almost felt like something was going to come crashing through my apartment. So I went upstairs to check, just to see sort of what they were doing, and saw just sort of it was like a grid of cables going across the rooftop. And at the edges, directly above my apartment balcony, were a number of these antennas, or the masts. And I asked about them, and the guy who seemed to be in charge sort of pointed out over the city and showed me where, these things are going up everywhere. There's nothing to worry about. And I mentioned that my balcony was just right below a couple of them. And again, he said there was nothing to worry about, and I believed him. And so somewhere within the next couple of months, I didn't tie it to this, but I started to get tinnitus, the really loud ringing in my ear, mostly when I was in my bed. And I had thought that perhaps I was getting tinnitus. When you research these kinds of things, it's just associated with getting older, it seems. And so I thought, wow, this is what happens when you get older, and this noise. And I thought that it happened particularly when I was in bed, because everything was silent then. The lights were out, there was less traffic, and I thought I would just notice the noise more at bedtime. But that was the first thing that happened. And slowly a number of things started showing up. But by January the following year, I was becoming really clear that something was impacting my health. Again, I didn't suspect the towers until in the last week of January, I left to teach a workshop at a place just outside of Toronto. And as I was pulling away with my girlfriend, I said to her, I have a feeling those things on my roof could be making me sick, because I wasn't feeling well, and I was almost going to cancel the workshop. And she encouraged me to do it, and so she picked me up, and I mentioned the towers, and she kind of blew it off, and I blew it off too, because it kind of sounded crazy, but not so crazy. But while I was up at this retreat spa center, it was noticeable that everything had started to recede. I wasn't feeling headaches. I wasn't feeling nauseous. I slept like a baby. I had had this weird cough that just came out of nowhere. The cough went away, and about over 3 or 4 days, I started to feel better. And so while I was up there, I started to research my symptoms in connection with radiation exposure, which is a very different thing than just researching your symptoms. When I connected it to radiation exposure, I seemed to go down a rabbit hole. And the rabbit hole is much smaller than it is today. But at that time, it was enough to kind of frighten me because I found associations with exposure to radiation for almost everything that I was experiencing. And so when I came home, I called a couple of companies that sold things to protect your body from radiation. And I spoke to one, her name is going to come to me, at a company, I actually want to find that name. But I called this company basically to ask questions regarding exposure, if it was healthy or not, or if there's something I could do about it. And
well, let me just pause you for a second, because I want to backtrack before too much, too many miles are covered here. Okay. So you were living in Toronto, right?
Yes. Still in Toronto.
Okay, and what year was this when these cell antennas went up on that building?
So the cell towers went on my roof towards the end of 2009. And by the end of February 2010, I was experiencing a number of symptoms that were kind of confusing.
Okay, so it only took a few weeks, really, a month or two.
Yes. I'd say a couple of weeks before they started. And then by the end of a couple of months, it was very obvious and noticeable. I didn't suspect the towers, but that was the only thing that had changed in terms of my environment.
And your primary symptom was this tinnitus. Can you describe that?
So that was the first symptom. The first symptom was tinnitus, which is a ringing in the ear, which is sometimes can be a high pitch, sometimes it's a low pitch. It really depends what the technology is I'm being exposed to. And so what we assume is something that's happening in our ear as we get older. I believe the term for it used to be, oh my gosh, it slipped my mind.
That's all right. If you think of it, you can fill us in. So you had this tinnitus, this ringing, and this was going on late at night when everything else was quiet.
Yes.
And was it also going on during the day, you think? But because other things happen, our world is noisier and there's more bustling, you weren't hearing it during the day?
Well, that's what I suspected. But what it turned out was I was hearing it mostly when I was in my apartment. And then as it got worse, it would be when I was exposed to particular frequencies. Because at one point, when I walked into my home, it would only happen if I walked into my bedroom specifically. It would be like turning a radio on, and I would literally back out and it would turn off. In my room, in the place where my bed was, it was almost as if they had said, there's her bed, put that slab of concrete right above, and then put that antenna right on top of that. It was literally square right above my bed. And so eventually it got so that, yes, if I walked into my bedroom, it turned on, and if I walked out, it turned off again. So it had something to do with the particular frequencies being given off of the towers in my bedroom. But yes, it started so it would come and go just about anywhere. It would sometimes interrupt a conversation. It was so loud.
Wow. And then you noticed some other symptoms, because you mentioned when you went to the retreat, certain things started going away. So you had, I guess, headaches, a cough. Did you have body aches? Just give us that quick list so the people know how to start identifying this in themselves.
Well, initially it started off as the tinnitus, and then the headaches, dizzy spells, nausea, and insomnia, and then just kind of a general feeling of not feeling well. By the end of my first year, though, the symptoms that had accumulated, to give you the list, is I had symptoms of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, arthritis, ringing in the ear, heart palpitations, short and long-term memory loss, and my hands trembled a lot, almost all the time. If I went to pick up a glass, I'd have to shake them just to get them still, or just sort of scrunch my fingers. But they shook most of the time. And in terms of, short and long term, in terms of the memory loss, the most memorable moment was when I was trying to type the word house, because I spent a lot of time trying to find a new home. I was writing the word house, and I got the letters HOU out, and I couldn't find the letter S for about 15 minutes. I could say house, but I couldn't find what letter to write after HOU.
In your mind, you didn't.
In my mind, yes, it was gone. It was like a blank, just HOU. I just kept saying HOU. Could not find the next letter.
Now, Veronica, can you give us your approximate age when this happened?
So my approximate age then was 50. I am now 55. And at the age of 50, people often guess that I was in my 30s. I have maintained a really high level of health and vitality, all of which is back now. But during that time, not only did I feel like I was 85 years old, I moved, looked, behaved, thought. Sometimes I'd ask my daughter a question, and then 5 minutes later I'd ask her again, and she'd say, "Mom, you already asked me that." And I'd say, "Did you answer me?" And she'd say, "Yes." And I said, "Well, then answer me again." Everything in my system seemed to age. There's a Dr. Magda Havas, who is an associate professor at Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario. She does a lot of work around this issue, and she calls it the rapid aging syndrome. She said because it mimics aging, and if you don't know what's happening, you just think you're getting old. Except if you're paying attention, you'll notice that it's particularly fast. So just the aches and pains all over the body. My wrists would swell up, my fingers swell up. I had the pains, the fibromyalgia pains within my body where you can't even identify where those pains are coming from. There's a huge umbrella that you can find of these symptoms that all fall under radiation exposure, or what they would now term a part of electrohypersensitivity. And if you separate groups of those, what you'll find is, if you take these four symptoms, that's what they call fibromyalgia. And then you take these 6 symptoms, that's what they call chronic fatigue. And then you take these 4 symptoms, they call it Parkinson's. And then you take this 7 symptoms, they call it arthritis. And then all of these symptoms fall under the same umbrella. And in my opinion, the rate at which we age has probably always had something to do with what we're exposed to in our environment. Electric and magnetic frequencies, however, are not as aggressive. And so they've probably been affecting us. But once the radiation got introduced to the degree that it is, I think it's just speeded up that process. Because by the end of the year, the waiting list to get a diagnosis for me, they had told me 7 months was the waiting list. It ended up taking 11 months. And from my understanding, it was because there are so many people showing up at the environmental health clinic in Toronto. And so you just had to wait a really long time even to get an appointment. But
so you waited to get a diagnosis from the credentialed people, health services, and by then, did you know, when did you go to that retreat and figure out what this is related to?
So when I went to the retreat, I knew that it was related to the towers, but I didn't know anything about it. There was a huge learning curve that happened after that, because a few days after I got home, I walked into the apartment. Myself and my daughter had been out of the apartment now for 4 days. And as we walked into the apartment, it was very obvious to us that something was different. Just getting off the elevator on the top floor, you could feel the tingling on your face, like you were feeling current and electricity, because it was such a high frequency just on the top floor. And within moments of being in the home, we both started to feel nauseous and get a headache. And so while I didn't want to worry my daughter, I started doing much more research. And I remember one night, waking up in my bed, which would happen after about 2 hours of sleep, which was about all I got each night. My body would go into this anxiety. It would be like I was having an anxiety attack. And I would wake up and my whole body would be tingling. And I wouldn't know why. And I remember on this particular night, there was a snowstorm. And so I wasn't going to be able to sleep. So I got up to do further research. And, of course, on my wireless laptop, I got up and like a fiend, I'm researching. And I remember every time I got back on my bed, I got an electric shock. And I've been sleeping on this bed for many years, and I've never gotten a shock from my mattress. And that was because I had a mattress, as most of us, I used to have a mattress that had the metal coils in it. And because there was so much current in the wiring wrapped around my bedroom, and then the towers on top of that, or the antennas on top of that, there was just so much current in my bedroom that every time I got on and off of my bed, you heard the sound of electricity or getting a shock. And so after that, I phoned, there was something that happened to my daughter one day. She was in the kitchen holding a knife. And while she was doing something, she dropped it and said that the knife got really hot and then really cold in her hand really quickly. And so she dropped it. And so I felt again that it had something to do with all this current that was racing around my apartment. And that's when I called the company. She gave me a long list of things that I could buy to wear or to plug in different areas of my apartment. And I thought, okay, this sounds really interesting. And it wasn't until after that I told her what I was trying to protect myself from. And she actually said, you know what? Can I call you back in 10 minutes? And I said, sure. She called me back in a few minutes, and she said that she had been told not to bother selling me anything, that I needed to move. And I thought, no, come on, that can't be that serious. And she said, she basically said, you're not going to like the news I have for you, but if you care about you and your daughter's health, you're going to have to move. And I asked her who she called, and she said she called the scientist who makes the products that she was selling. And basically told me that, because I explained that it was the antennas on the roof. She said that I wasn't going to be able to avoid much. And she suggested that I stop sleeping on anything that had metal on it. So I stopped sleeping on my bed. And then I tried sleeping on the couch, and then discovered that the couch had metal in it. And so for the last 4 days in my apartment, I was sleeping on cushions on the floor. And every single night that I went to sleep, I felt like I was going to have a heart attack.
So let me differentiate a couple of things here, because I've been studying electrohypersensitivity. I'm somewhat sensitive myself now. So because you had those antennas on the roof, and I call the antenna the small transmitter, relatively small. Towers I call the very big ones that are very tall, and they're usually on mountaintops, and they belt out a ton. They're very high power. This is a complete myth that cellular radiation is low power. It's high power coming from the transmitters, the big main transmitters. And so I think that what was going on with you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had, was it 5 or 6 of these on the roof, these antennas, but you were receiving electrical, very high voltage. You had very high body voltage from this. You were in very strong electrical energy fields from actual current, power, what would be measured in power measurements, voltage. But then there were also radio frequencies in addition to that.
That would be correct. So there was a lot of the high voltage around the apartment, which explains some of the things with the shocks. However, I have a photograph of the measurements of one of the antennas on the roof. Each antenna, I would say, would be about 6 to 8 feet tall, and then there'd be 2 of them mounted on. And I've always called them cell towers, and I know there is a difference. The structure that they put the antennas on is usually what's called the towers, which are the ones that you'll find in the countryside, more or less. But there'd be 2. There was 25 of them on the building. 10 of them were over my apartment. But sometimes it was two antennas per mast. So spread out around the building, there was 10 of them. Sort of just going around the corner that all covered the top of my apartment. The rest of them were on the apartments of my neighbors. So what I was exposed to was both. I was being mostly affected by the radiation. However, the the voltage was also affecting me. One of the towers that was closest to my bedroom, I believe the measurement was 17,000 microwatts per meter squared, is what the meter showed when we first measured that one. And so it was a combination of both that was affecting me in different ways.
Wow, this is really amazing. Did you ever look into the contract that the owner of the building signed with the telecom company? How much was being paid for the placement of these masts and antennas?
Yes, I believe, if my memory serves me, it was between 500 and 800 per mast, per antenna. Per antenna. So there was 25 of them on the roof is what I believe.
That's per month, per antenna.
Yes, per month. Yeah. And, you know, within a short while, everybody on the top floor vacated. I was the first one to realize what was happening. And so I had abandoned my home a week after coming back from that retreat up north. I abandoned my home and started sleeping at friends' homes. And over a period for the first about 10 days, I slept at a friend's home that was very close by so that my daughter could keep going to school. But during that time period, I found myself getting worse and I was confused because I was still at the beginning of my learning curve and I couldn't figure out why, you know, I'm no longer underneath these cell antennas. Why am I getting worse? And what I discovered was now that I was in this other home, the bedroom was relatively small, her spare bedroom. But in that bedroom, at the foot of my bed was a cordless phone. And on the other side of the wall from there was her Wi-Fi router. And then during the daytime, I spent all of the day on my wireless laptop and on my cell phone trying to find out what was happening. And so I didn't understand that, yes, I'd moved from the cell towers or the cell antennas, but I was now being affected by everything else. My body had sort of crossed that point of absorption before it started to deteriorate. And so I was now becoming increasingly sensitive just from everything. And it went from things that gave off a radio frequency to things like the fridge, the stove, leaning against a wall, anything that had electrical current in it. Within moments of touching it, I could feel it and I would have to back off. I couldn't even lay on the floor if it was above the basement because I could feel the wiring to such a degree that I felt like I was a part of the cabling. The body would just sort of vibrate like zzz, like you could almost hear and feel the hum in my body. I could.
That's pretty dramatic, Veronica.
Yeah, it was a really, really intense time. So I abandoned my home, and then over the next couple of weeks, there was a point where over 9 days I slept in 6 different locations because I had offers from friends and family to stay in their homes, but we were still learning the degree to which I'd already become sensitive. And so everybody has a Wi-Fi router, everybody has a cordless phone, and even when they turned off everything in their homes, my body could still feel it from the neighbors. And so, I could tell you where their cordless phone was in their house. I could tell you where their Wi-Fi router was in their house just by the sensations in my body. And so, I just became increasingly sensitive, and it wasn't pleasant at all.
So you were like a divining rod for electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation. You were a walking divining rod.
Yes, I was. There was someone here who actually said that I was like a very expensive meter, he said. Because there was a time when I could actually walk by houses and I could tell you if they had Wi-Fi or a cordless phone. It sounds crazy until you've actually seen it. There are a number of women who I managed to do some work with during that time, just like to actually, a girlfriend of mine hired me to work for her company as much as I could. And there's some women who worked for me, and they were always amazed when I could tell them when there was a microwave oven on somewhere. And sure enough, a few minutes later, would hear the bell go off that said, yes, there was a microwave oven on. And for a long time, I could tell you if a BlackBerry came into my home. Back then, BlackBerries had become very, very popular. And iPhone G4 was just getting ready to be introduced. And I remember whenever a BlackBerry came really close to me, I could ask my friends, did somebody come into my home with a BlackBerry? We could always find it, and they'd either put it in the car or they'd turn it off. The same happened when iPhone G4 came out. And what was interesting is that one of the ways I identified them is they felt exactly the same way a microwave oven felt to my body when it was turned on. which was really, really telling to me that if these two phones feel like it feels when I'm in a house with a microwave oven, that's not really good news. But it became very specific that I could tell you what a Wi-Fi router felt like, what an antenna on the top of a building felt like, what a cordless phone felt like, and what particular phones felt like. And none of it was pleasant. None of it was pleasant.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I mean, it sounds very entertaining in some ways, but it's not entertaining and amusing because you had very almost like crushing and horrifying physical symptoms going on while you developed and had this sensitivity. Now, just jumping forward, do you still have those abilities?
Not as much as I did. So I'm still electrosensitive, but I'm no longer debilitated by the exposure. So I can expose myself to just about anything, whereas before I would feel it immediately. Because when you're exposed to radiation, it puts your body in fight or flight. And so immediately I would have anxiety, like I would literally want to run. And the fear factor would just go from 0 to 10 in seconds. And eventually it got so just seeing a phone would do that, because you knew what was coming next. Sometimes someone could be behind me and I would know they just made a call because of the sensations that went through my body, which would often make me jump. And if you were standing with me, you'd sort of see me go, shit. Just like that, excuse my language, because each time the signal passed through my body, it would be like a sharp needle just shot through me. And it could be at any part. It could be in my shoulder, my hip, my leg, my knee, my head. But I could feel it, and I would turn around, and sure enough, someone would have just finished placing a call. And depending on the angle and the distance, I would feel it as it moved through my body. And so, as much as people think that radiation is nothing because we can't see it, it is certainly not. Just because it's invisible, it certainly isn't nothing.
So, Veronica, you felt this when someone finished a call. What about when they were in the middle of the call? Why did it take a little bit of time for it to arrive?
No, I felt it when the call was going out from the phone. So when they dialed it and then the signal went out, I felt it immediately.
Right. So when the phone was transmitting.
Yes. When the phone was transmitting, it was like sharp pains. It was the same thing I got from the smart meter. I had a smart meter on my house for about 2 weeks. I'm one of very few people who managed to get them off very quickly. And it's become very difficult since then. But you could almost time the smart meter to my body because every time it went off, I could feel it.
And how often was that? Because I've read that they can pulse up to like 190,000 times a day.
I would say so. For me, it was every 4 to 10 minutes. And you'd get this bop, 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 bop. And then it would stop. And then about 4 to 10 minutes later, it would happen again. And depending on where I was in the house, I would feel it physically. You know
that with the smart meters, they haven't deployed the second relayer yet. Do you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's right now in that smart meter world. Yes. It's a 900 megahertz transmitter, but the 2.4 relayer is built in, and that they're waiting, I believe, what I've understood, I could be wrong, but this is what I've gathered, for customers to request that one be turned on. So when you get these robocalls from the utility company suggesting ways to save energy, I think what that does is it you are tacitly, without realizing it, giving your permission for the switching on of that second relayer. And then there will be no recourse with health effects because it will be the customer who requested to have that turned on.
Yeah. When they came to my home to put a smart water meter on some time ago, because most of the houses, I think all of the houses in my neighborhood have smart water meters. And it was interesting when, they sent me the notice and then I called the office to say, I don't want one. So we don't need to make an appointment. And they tried to talk me into it. And the person on the phone tried to say to me that, it's no different than a radio signal like that you're getting from your radio. And I said to him, is that what you're telling people? It's like, I think when they sent a couple of people from the office to my house, and I think they were a little bit in shock about how much I knew. I'm pretty sure I knew much more about them, certainly about the effects. But they basically tried to tell me it was like a TV or a radio antenna, which is a whole different frequency. And I actually thought that they believed that, and so they're telling people this and everybody's saying yes, but I was like, yeah, no, it's not happening here. And they've pretty much left me alone. They didn't even get back to me. They said they were going to go do more research to answer all of my questions, and they just never called again. And so I know I pay for that, but my health is worth that, $30 to $80 a month to keep the smart meter off and the smart water meter out of my basement.
So what I've learned about radio stations and TV stations, I learned this from an electrical engineer. Mm-hmm. Remember that in the old days, yes, we had radio and TV for a couple of generations. But the reality was that we owned and operated the receivers. We did not own and operate the transmitters. The transmitted signal was from the station, and that was all shielded. Those antennas were heavily shielded. And there were a lot of operators at the station who suffered injuries from those frequencies when they weren't for some reason protected by the shielding. I've learned that there have been cancer clusters in cities where people live near radio stations, near the broadcasting masts or whatever they were. I don't know how to describe them, what the term is. But for instance, I went to school at Brown University in Rhode Island, and they had a very powerful signal from WBRU. It was a college radio station. They were very, very proud of their programming and how many people listened to them. And they had this powerful signal. So I was close, very close in the dorms to the WBRU transmitter. But I didn't live there all my life, So when we lived and only owned the receivers, the farther you are away from the signal, the weaker and weaker it gets. It's called attenuation. So, but today we are owning and operating transmitting devices, and you were sleeping right under multiple powerful transmitters.
Yes, for sure. And so many people continue to. It's so unfortunate because if they knew, they could actually make changes. They could actually do something about it. Yeah, it's just it's hard. It's not hard, but sometimes I see people on the street who look unwell, and my intuition tells me that this is what's causing it. I don't know how I know, because everything else about them looks like that they're incredibly healthy people. But the way they're moving, sometimes they're using crutches, sometimes they're not. Or just people telling me things. Let me not go down that road yet.
Did you try to, while this was happening to you, before you figured out how to remediate yourself, your body, were you trying to urge your friends to take this very seriously because it could happen to them too?
I was a bit, because my friends who know me, they know me. And, for some of them, they know that if this is happening to me, if I'm reacting like this, that it must be pretty serious, because I'm generally pretty grounded and generally incredibly healthy. So they know all these things about me. There was one woman who said to me, she said, Veronica, she said, you may not want to hear this right now. She said, but this couldn't have happened to a better person. And I think through tears, I was like, what are you talking about? She said, because I know one day you're going to kick ass. And some part of her just felt that I was going to beat this and that I was going to do more than that. So my friends actually took it quite seriously. I have a lot of friends who made changes, whether or not they kept them up, because it's a lot to ask people to do all of a sudden, so it became difficult to even visit friends' homes unless they could turn off certain parts of their technology. And so I became a bit of a hermit. I didn't go to parties. I didn't go out much at all. I used to spend hours at a time sitting in Starbucks reading and writing. And I think I stopped going to Starbucks for about 2 years. Except for very short spurts of time, because just looking around the room at how many laptops were on Wi-Fi and cell phones on Wi-Fi would give me anxiety just to look at them, much less the feeling I would get if I stayed for too long. So yeah, my friends definitely listened. They either changed technology, most of them went back to corded phones and did their best to wire their computers. And looking for a place to live just changed for a number of people. Different people that I know borrowed my meters so that they could make sure, there wasn't huge towers streaming in their bedroom windows while they were sleeping. And so, yeah, a lot of people listened, and then a lot of people didn't. Some people just sort of was like, well, that's crazy. Like, it's everywhere, as though it being everywhere meant it should be fine. So it was, there were moments back then when it was kind of frustrating trying to express the importance of it. But for the most part, for whatever reason, people took me seriously. Whether I was speaking at a government event or to a room of people, for some reason they have listened. Most of the talking I started to do after I had started to reverse my symptoms. I didn't know if I was going to be successful, but I had managed to move myself out of the severe victim mentality that I was in when it first happened. And I think speaking from that place altered the way people heard me.
Speaking from the non-victim place.
Yes. To jump forward, so I spent most of a year suffering in numerous ways because it affects you physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Emotionally, I was a completely different person. I was impatient. I was antagonistic. I was quick to anger, quick to tears. I was just all over the place. And so everything in my life changed, and all of this with my 14, 15-year-old daughter in tow. And so it took me 9 months to find the home that I live in now. Every week I would go look at places, and I remember it being winter. I'd spent 9 months in a home that someone had allowed me to stay in while they were mostly out of the country. And in that home, he had no technology. And the only place where I could feel something was coming from the cordless phone in the back of the neighbor's house, and then the smart meter that had been put onto his house, unbeknownst to him. And so I slept mostly in the basement, and I sort of built myself a big foil wall to sort of shield myself from this, something that almost every electrosensitive person who's gone through this kind of path has built something like this before. Easy to laugh about now. It wasn't funny at all then. So I spent 9 months there while looking for a place that I could move into that would be somewhat healthier. That proved to be very, very, very difficult. And when I finally found a place, I remember I would take my meter that I could use with headphones so that I could be discreet. And I measured this home, mostly at the windows, and it was like, wow, there's almost no signal coming in here. This is good. This is good. I measured all the windows, and it felt good to me. And there was practically no signal coming through the windows, which is the place that I chose to pull out this meter. And we didn't take the place at first, but Christmas was coming, and I thought, you know what, I want to be in my own home and out of a basement before Christmas comes. So we took this home, and I remember the day that I was moving in, it was the first time I'd spent more than 15 minutes in the house. I started to feel things I hadn't felt during that 15 minutes. And, I just sort of pushed it to the back of my mind, got everything out of my storage, had to get help because I had help putting it all away. I had help taking it all out. And when they left, here I was in the midst of this moving mess. And I remember going to sleep that night really aware that I was feeling something. I think before that point, what I had done was I took out my meter And I measured elsewhere in the house and was getting a signal. The meter that I had was an older model, so it didn't measure everything. But what had happened was I did not yet know about something called low E windows, which are windows that keep out radiation. And so while I was measuring at my windows and feeling like, wow, this is great, there's practically nothing coming in here, I didn't realize that it was coming in everywhere but the windows. And so I had now moved into a home where I was almost as exposed as I was in my apartment, not in the same way, but my body had now become so sensitive that, yeah, any exposure was going to affect me. And so the first night I tried to sleep in the house, my body woke up and said, no, you can't sleep here. I tried every room. I think the two places that were the best was one of the bathrooms and the spare bedroom, which was now filled with boxes. And so I realized right away, it was like I jumped out of a fire and into a frying pan. And so I ended up going back to where I'd been living for 9 months. I ended up going back there and sleeping. And at this point, I was almost more distraught than the first time I moved into his house, because I thought 9 months later I was about to start moving in a better direction. And now here I was in a home that I was quite certain was going to kill me.
So you actually only measured at the windows. And I interviewed an environmental specialist, Larry Gust. Yes. People can scroll down and find that interview. It was done last year in, I think, August. And he did speak of the low E glass, that will filter the radio frequencies out. But you didn't, so you just took the meter to the windows because you thought that the signal would be coming in through the windows. Is that why you did that?
Yeah, because I was trying to be discreet. And so I thought, if I'm not feeling anything through the windows, I wasn't really worried about the walls because I didn't know about low E windows. So it was just in an effort to be discreet. I'd sort of go up to the window and pull out my meter and sort of point it in numerous directions. I was like, okay, this sounds good. And I had the headphones in, right? And so it was at moments when at the time the landlord wouldn't notice because I didn't want him to think I was, crazy, with this whole conversation, which now more people are used to. But back then it just sounded like I was a nut bar to some people. And so yeah, that was it. It was coming in everywhere but the windows. And that was the only places I'd measured. I didn't keep it on throughout the house, which is probably what I should have done, but I wasn't, because it wasn't coming through the windows, I wasn't as worried. It was worse on the top floor, which is my bedroom, I think had the highest exposure than anywhere else in the house. But basically once I moved in, not only was I feeling that, I was just feeling it just a lot. And so here I was now in this house where I was quite certain I didn't have the strength or the will to do anything about it at this point. And so a friend of mine ended up purchasing for me one of the RF canopies. So I sleep in an RF canopy, which is like a Faraday cage. It looks a bit like a mosquito net, but a lot thicker. So I had one of those set up before I started sleeping in the bedroom again, and that's when I started sleeping in the house. So for 2 weeks, I started sleeping back at the house that I was in for the 9 months previous. So we set up the canopy. I'm actually moving in the direction of how I started to reverse the symptoms. Unless you have any questions, please stop me if you have any more questions about that time period, because I know I've kind of jumped all over the place.
No, actually it makes sense to me. I really ask questions when I'm trying to establish understanding, because I know that if I don't understand something, probably other people aren't either going to understand it. So you actually went back. You're in the house that you read the windows of only, and you are sleeping under a canopy, and being back in the situation, jumping from the frying pan into the fire, caused you to start figuring out how to reverse these symptoms. That's what I'm very interested in now. So by all means, tell us.
So I had actually started to work on reversing the symptoms before I moved into this house, because in the April of that year, I had been told that the waiting list to get into the environmental health clinic was at least 7 months long. And I remember, it's interesting, when you call them and you're in tears, you feel like you're dying. You actually feel like you're dying. I've met numerous people who say the same thing. What you feel like is you feel like your body is just dying. It's being eaten away by radiation. And I remember, you call them and it's sort of like, this is what you have to do. You fill out this application and it's 7 to 8 months. And I thought, okay. So while going through that process, which took me long enough, I knew that I was going to have to start figuring this out. I mean, that's just the kind of person I am. I will research like a fiend. And so I'd already started to do that, but I started to do it even more so. So I started to implement a couple of things that I know made a bit of a difference. One of them was I was in a health food store here called the Big Carrot. And a guy who worked in the health food store told me about something called oil pulling. And I was there, I remember, to get the Scheffler. What did the Scheffler, what is that stuff? I'm sorry, I don't remember these things.
What's it for?
It's for this it's like homeopathic remedies. Scheffler, do you know them? They're like homeopathic remedies. I should remember. Oh, this is terrible. I was there to get. It's like homeopathic remedies. And so I told him what I was looking for, the kinds of things I needed them for. He suggested I try oil pulling. He said that it was something they had used years ago. See, all these things that are not coming to me now that are always so present. For radiation exposure in Europe when that big exposure had happened.
Chernobyl?
Yes, Chernobyl. That it was something that they had implemented at that point, that people had used that during that time period. So I brought home a bottle of sunflower oil and I started oil pulling right away. Within the same week, someone also told me about Soleil drinking, S-O-L-E, which is when you take a teaspoon of Himalayan salt brine water into a glass of water, and you drink that first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. So within a week, I started doing those two things. I would oil pull first thing in the morning, brush my teeth with baking soda, and then immediately after that, I would drink a glass of this Soleil. And for sure, within a week or two of doing that, something in my body felt more relaxed. It didn't make me better, but it made a difference that helped me move in the direction of being better. So those became something I did every single day. This is when I was still living in the place where I was for 9 months. Those are two things I started doing right away. They're small things, but they were important things to me. During that time period, I also couldn't work. And so there are a lot of things I would have loved to have done or tried that I couldn't actually afford. I couldn't even afford to see a holistic doctor. Just the first visit was more than I could afford, much less to keep going. So it's really challenging when you have something like this and everything to help it get better is so expensive. It's a very expensive problem to have. And so the path that I've taken was just, for me, the perfect path, it turns out. But so these were two things that I started doing almost immediately. They made a difference. Another thing I started doing is I had read the Earthing book. And while at the time I couldn't afford any of the technology, like the grounding mats that you could sit on or sleep on, which for me personally, the jury is still out on if you're electrosensitive. Intuitively, I don't want to sleep anything that is plugged in anywhere, even if it's just to ground it. But what I did start doing was grounding in the most basic way. I started walking barefoot in parks or anywhere I had access to grass. Even the concrete was better than nothing. And so I started doing those things early on. And they were helping. I was drinking as much water as I could, doing the simplest things to alkalize my body, like lemon water, grapefruit water, a bit of iodine here and there, but just really simple things. During this time period, my diet was probably worse than it's ever been in my life because I didn't restock the home that I was going to with condiments. And so we ate out a lot, mostly for my daughter's sake. And the food just was not, the best quality. But it's interesting because if I believed everything we are told we need to do in order to recover, I probably wouldn't have recovered. But I'd already been deeply into all of the stuff that continue to be into before this happened. Although during the crisis period, I didn't access any of it. It was everything. Life was just too hard to even couldn't meditate. It was just like, meditate, what are you talking about? It was just, I swore a lot. And, so I wasn't really sort of grounded in trying to implement all of the healing things that I'd learned over the years. And there were a great deal of them. I had just thought my body was now dying. I had just thought that all of the work that I had done to maintain my level of vitality and youthfulness and health was now out the window because of 2 months of exposure to high levels of radiation. So I just thought I was just on my way out. Didn't know how long it would take, but this was now the path towards death. And if it wasn't the path towards death, by the time I'd gotten into this house, death felt easier than living in a house now where I was exposed again. I just, I think if I didn't have my daughter, who was 14, about to turn 15 at that time, I think I would have just shriveled away in this house in tears. But I sort of had to force myself to keep it together for her. But at that point, I was definitely, I don't know that I was suicidal, but I had thoughts and I understood why. I thought, this is it. This is that place where I think it would be easier for me to just leave this earth, right? But so I started to do small things.
We're really talking about your life force, and with all the assaults that your cells were having to bear, you started to feel that life force leaving you.
Yes.
But then these small, very simple steps you took, I want to actually delve into them a little bit. Okay. Let's start with the salt. So sea salt or earth salt, which is what the Himalayan salt is, it's mountain salt. It's real salt, not NaCl, the table salt, which is a very devitalized, very bleached out. I mean, they ruin salt. They take out what they call the impurities, but those are actually up to 100 trace minerals. Mm-hmm. So the minerals found in real salt are extremely biologically beneficial. Your body needs dozens and dozens of trace minerals. Trace. You don't have to go to a store and buy bottles of this stuff, tablets, and spend, $25 on each one and have this storehouse of things in your cupboard that you take every day. You need a few pinches of real salt. So when you provided your cellular environment with these very necessary, crucial minerals, your cells were able to pick up their housekeeping efforts and do their biochemical work, the detoxing particularly, way better than they had been, especially with eating out, right?
Yes. And it was noticeable to me. It wasn't stopping the electrosensitivity, but I could feel the difference that it was making, and they say that it also raises your vibration for 24 hours. So it became like brushing my teeth for me.
Right. And to get back to your mouth, we have in our mouths, because our mouths open all day long while we talk and breathe. Similarly, the lungs, it's very hard to control illness in the lungs because the lungs are always opening up. They're receiving air and they're getting foreign materials. So oil pulling, I've not done it because I have this crazy, thought that if I try it, I'm going to think of something hilarious and it's going to go right out of my mouth all over the rug or wherever. But oil pulling, as I've learned about it, is taking a teaspoon or two of oil in your mouth. Lots of people use olive oil or safflower or maybe that's a bad oil. Anyway.
I'll tell you now, though, olive oil is probably the only oil I've never seen recommended. It's the only oil I cannot use. So anyone who uses olive oil usually cannot stand to oil pull.
Is that right? I wonder why.
I don't know why, but I know that whenever I've tried it, it's like it leaves this thick coating in the mouth. It's really thick. Sunflower oil, coconut oil, almond, walnut. Those are the ones you hear about the most. My choice has been sunflower oil because it has the least taste.
But that's very interesting. You know what? I said all the wrong oils, obviously, because I've never done it. But yes, you're right. Olive oil is very viscous. It's very thick. The other oils are lighter. Coconut oil, actually, when you heat it, it turns very light.
And you can put a chunk of the solid stuff in your mouth, and it'll just melt right away, and then you oil pull with it. But my choice is still sunflower. But you put 1 tablespoon of oil in your mouth, and then you oil pull for 5 to 15 minutes. As long as you can stand. But it is it's such a non-invasive way to detoxify the body. You know, yeah, it's made a huge difference. For me, my skin got better, my teeth got better, my eyes got brighter. And yeah, together those things felt like they were really making a big difference. And so those are very simple things people can do for their body, right? Between that and the walking on the earth, right? And then drinking as much of the best water you have access to. And I say the best water because during that time period, when I was staying at that house, I was able to drink what's called Kangen water. Kangen is one of those really expensive filters that creates alkaline water. And I remember becoming really attached to the Kangen water until the people who staying in the house left the house and took the Kangen water filter with them. And for about 2 weeks, I was lost. I didn't know no water felt good enough to drink. And I'm so glad I got over that because eventually I started using the Brita filter again. And then I was using something called a quantum stir wand that I would stir the water with. I now have a whole other set of rituals that I do for my water, but it definitely made the water taste better. But what I think it's always important not to become too attached to any shoulds when we are in healing mode. Like you must drink alkaline water, you must eat raw, you must eat organic, you must be a vegetarian. If you eat all the musts that we are told when we need to heal, really, they're really good for the body. And so if the only place we're dealing with healing is from the level of the body, then yes, all of those things become important. But there are higher levels from which to heal. And when you heal from the higher level, it's like a drop-down effect. You know, it's like the less you have to do, but the more effect it has. It's like moving into the quantum field to heal. And so all of these good things we do for the body are good for us. But if you can work from a level above that, it actually doesn't matter if you live on submarine sandwiches.
Very interesting. So I just want to cover the oil pulling for one more minute. Okay. As I've learned it, you put this oil in your mouth, a tablespoon, and then you have to just swish and swirl it for 5 to 15 minutes. It's called pulling because it pulls the bacteria and other, I don't even know what, substances out of your gum tissues that are in there because you're always opening your mouth. And from there, they can start infiltrating into the body, and they're basically a contaminant source. So I am very now interested in doing this. I will not think of anything funny. I don't know why I believe that that's going to be my downfall when I do oil pulling. But yeah, you're supposed to hold that in your mouth for 5 to 15 seconds and then, no, minutes, and then you spit.
And then you spit it out. Yeah, you definitely don't swallow any. But what I understand is as much as it is about the gums, it's also about the tongue. Because they say the tongue, like all of your systems are connected to your tongue in some way. And so it's like you're pulling heavy metals, toxins, poisons out from the body, but through this system, through the mouth, through the tongue, through the gums. And yeah, and I also understand it to be called pulling because what you're doing is you're pulling it through your teeth from the outside. Like you imagine puckering your cheek and then pulling it through the teeth on the right side, pulling it on the left side, pulling it on both sides. It's like swishing it around, but it's a more aggressive thing when you're pulling it through the teeth. You can actually find videos online that have people pulling it, so you can actually see how to do it. On my website. Am I allowed to say the website?
Of course. We're going to go over that anyway at the
Okay. So I have a website called So Grounded that I built during this time period. And it's So Grounded spelled SOWE, which stands for salt, oil, water, and earth. So it's sogrounded.com. But on there, you'll see a page for salt, oil, water, and earth with a lot of instructions on how to make the brine and how to use the brine. But yeah, definitely these things are really I don't think medicine could get more inexpensive and easily accessible than salt, oil, and water.
No, you're absolutely right. And then when you start noticing the recovery, the bouncing back, that puts you in that higher realm. That's what enables you to climb a few steps on the ladder and go into what you call the higher level or the quantum healing.
Actually, no, not quite yet. And so those were steps that made me feel a bit better. but there was way, 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 way more to go. Like I was, there was no part of me smiling yet. So I now move in. So this is something just became a part of my schedule, because it was maintaining something I could tell, but it wasn't making me better per se. I was still hugely afraid. I was afraid to go everywhere. I was afraid just the sight of a cell phone, was frightening for me. It was very hard for me to travel on buses, because on a bus you could have like 40 or 50 people all looking at their cell phones at the same time. And I cannot tell you the physical pain. I would have to remove myself from buses over and over again. And I eventually learned to sit next to the elderly, because then it was less likely they were going to pull out a BlackBerry and put it up next to their head, next to your head. And so it was still a lot of struggle. But I find this house, I move in, and then the struggle gets harder again for a time. So now I'm sleeping in this canopy, and on one of the first days that my daughter goes to school, I turn off all the circuits in the house. In order to use this canopy, you have to have all the circuits off in the bedroom. All the walls around the bedroom that this canopy is being used in has to have no current, because it's made of silver and cotton, so there's metal. And if there's any current at all, it's going to be running through the metal, and you'll feel like you're sleeping in an electrical bubble, which is exactly what happened to me the first night when I didn't realize some circuit was on. So since then, I always sleep with all of the circuits turned off at the breaker in my house. It just removes all electrical current, which is the best way for us to sleep. So I'm now sleeping in this canopy, but in my house during the day, I am very afraid. The levels are so high in the bathroom. Just sitting on the toilet, I'm really aware that I'm closest to a wall that faces the towers that are about 4 blocks away. So I can't wait to get out of the bathroom. If I sit on the couch by the window, I feel like I'm being bombarded. If I sit by the wall, I feel like I'm being bombarded. So there's no rest for me really in my house. But at least I have the job of unpacking, because we've decided we're going to stay till at least the following spring or summer. And then I would start looking again, because I thought I can't stay here, but for now I can survive here. And so I'm afraid that there's no relaxing anywhere in my house. And I thought, I didn't know how I'd survive even just not being able to even sit down and read, or, if I watch TV, to sit down and watch TV, or just, I couldn't relax anywhere. So unpacking was the only mission job I had, and being fearful and crying all the time was the rest of the time. And so this morning I set up the canopy. The canopy was already set up. My daughter had gone to school, and I got back into the canopy, turned off all the power, decided I'd spend the next few hours just in a zone with nothing, no radiation. It was the only place that I could go where I didn't feel bombarded. And on this morning, I decided to try meditating, which I hadn't done for a long time. So I sat in meditation, and then I started to weep and weep and weep, and just continuous weeping. And then I started to pray, and then started to converse with God, because I was just sort of confused how, after all the suffering I'd gone through, and at the time the conversation was like, how could you let me make a mistake of moving into this house that was going to kill me? Like, what the F? You know what I mean? Like, what have I done to deserve this? Was the conversation, it was like one big long, why me? What did I do to deserve this? And how do I end up in this house after all that I've been through? I was so careful. And then I end up in a house that I'm certain is going to kill me. And so I decided to take out my pendulum. I took out my pendulum. Are you familiar with pendulums? Of course you are.
Yes, I am. Yeah, but you're a nut,
What's that?
I said, you're a nut.
I'm a nut. I have my moments. So anyways, I take out my pendulum, and I started asking the questions. Have I made a mistake moving into this house? Said no. I said, does this house have high radiation? Said yes. Did I make a mistake moving to this house? No. Am I in the house I'm supposed to be in? Yes. But doesn't it have high radiation? Yes. Could I get well in this house? No, I think I asked the question next. I may have asked, could I die in this house, or will I die in this house? It said no. Could I die in this house? It said yes. I said, will I? No. Could I get well in this house? Yes. Could I thrive in this house? Yes. But doesn't it have high radiation? Yes. Did I make a mistake? No. Am I in the right house? Yes. Could I get well? Yeah. I kept asking the same questions over and over again. And while I was asking these questions, you know how they say when you have a shift that it is irreversible? So while this was happening, a shift was happening in me. It was like something in me just turned on, and I began to understand that something bigger than me and my body was going on here, because spirit was now telling me, no, you're in the right place. Yes, it's got a lot of radiation. Yes, it could kill you, but it's not going to. Yes, you could get well. Yes, you could thrive there. No, you didn't make a mistake. So my eyes are just sort of like, I'm just lighting up going, okay, what? Okay. And so I continued asking for guidance, and then the guidance was very, very, very clear. And the guidance I got was this: you've had 9 months to a year to kind of get your feet back on the ground. You have work to do. You have the tools to do it, and you can't do it anywhere but in this house. And the minute I heard that, I knew exactly what I was being asked to do. I knew exactly what it was. And right then and there, I wrote my first affirmation. So basically, when Spirit was saying, you have the tools, now use them, I had developed, the year before, towards the end of the year, I had developed a workshop that I was going to be offering in elementary schools. At the time, it was called Let Your Thoughts Be the Change. And it was basically teaching elementary school students a 4-step process to turn problems into possibilities. So I was basically teaching them how to use the law of attraction, but using different language, because this was an elementary school. The workshop had been approved in like September of the year before. By January of the following year, it could have been my full-time work. And that was the work that I'd been developing. So it was like Spirit was basically saying, use them. Like, you've got these tools, use them. And I knew that's what it was saying. But before that part, for whatever reasons, there was no part of my mind thinking, I wonder if I could use the law of attraction. Because in my mind, this was radiation. This was an element. This was a law of nature. Radiation is doing what it does, and that's just what it does. It was like saying I could stand in front of a bus and it not hurt when it hit, right? That's how I was holding it before. But now this is what the guidance that came in. It was so clear. And so I wrote an affirmation before I came out of the canopy that morning. And when I came out of the canopy, it was a completely different person that came out. There was nothing different about my body, or maybe, yes, the difference had already begun, but there was certainly nothing different. Nothing had changed in terms of my exposure. The only thing that had changed was my understanding of what was possible, and my level of fear had gone from a 10 to maybe an 8. And so even though I could feel the same things I felt in my home, what I would do is, as soon as I felt the radiation, I would read this affirmation I'd written. And, I questioned myself numerous times, like, you must be crazy, like, to think that you can tell your body what you're telling your body and reverse the symptoms. Yet on one hand, I knew that science was proving this, but on the other hand, when you're feeling the way you're feeling, you're like, okay, Veronica, really? And so I didn't really tell anybody that I was doing this, but I committed to it, because just the change in my fear was so freaking palpable that I was astonished. I was like, oh my God. Like, I know that my getting ill was not in my head. Getting ill is not just in our heads, even though, our thoughts have something to do with it. It is not just in our heads. It is so in our bodies. However, the path to wellness, we can just give all of that duty to what's in our heads, right? And so while I didn't talk about it, I started to implement. That was my first affirmation that I wrote, and the change was noticeable. And so if I was riding the bus, and the minute I would feel radiation, sometimes it would just be driving past a huge set of antennas. My body would start to just behave the way it does when it was exposed. It had a cellular memory of what it does when it's exposed to radiation. And you just even thinking of the words cellular memory. We all have cellular memory. And so the minute I would go into fight or flight, I could feel it. It was almost as though I'd be sitting there, but some part of me just took off running. And what I would do is I would pull out this little piece of paper, and I would read it until I committed it to memory. And I would sit there in silence while reading this thing over and over again. And it was almost as though I would feel my spirit come back in my body. And by the time it got back in, the sensations would have subsided. And it'd be like, okay, I'm fine. And whether it was because I'd driven past it and I was far enough away, whatever it was, I began to have a bit of control. And it would start with just reading this affirmation. I started to tell my body something different. I started to tell my body that when you are exposed to radiation, this is how you're going to behave. And over time, my body listened. It was astonishing to watch and to experience, but I knew what I was doing and I knew it was possible. And during that time, I exposed myself to people whose books I read, I had been reading, but during this time period, your mind, foggy brain is also one of the things that happens. And so your mind, you can't focus. You just can't. So reading was just out of the question. I had books I was walking around with because I wanted, just out of the question. And so what I started to do was while I was in this, once I got my computer wired, I would have people like Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton and Esther Hicks playing 24/7. I didn't need to be at the computer. I just listened all day, all night, because it kept my body in a higher vibration, just listening to what was possible, right? And one of the things Joe Dispenza said that I will never forget is he said, the mind is more powerful than science, and the mind is more powerful than biology. He said, do not wait for science to come and tell you what you can do with the body. He said, experiment and then let science come and ask you, how did you do that? And
that's
those
pretty
words,
amazing. You know, there's a little factoid I learned about him. Mm-hmm. He was in the movie What the Bleep
Yes.
Do We Know? He's a chiropractor, I think, Joe Dispenza. But he lived through a very, very horrible accident.
Yeah.
And that's when he really started to learn the potential of what you just described.
Exactly. I am one of his hugest fans. I love that man. I've actually taken one of his workshops, and I just saw him speak again recently in Toronto this summer. But I think his words, Bruce Lipton at the time, The Biology of Belief. I had read both of their books, but I was now listening to them over and over and over, and listening to the same things sometimes over and over again. Some of those videos are on my website, So Grounded, because what they were teaching me was how the body works, how the cells communicate, and what was possible in terms of if we change how we communicate with ourselves. And so that is in effect what I did. Can I tell you the affirmation that it was that made the biggest difference? The first one?
Yes.
So and you can find it on the website. So sometimes people try to write it down when I'm talking, but it is on the website. So what it became was exposure. Oh, wait, I've got it here. Exposure to microwave radiation and other forms of EMFs confirms my body's natural ability to maintain radiant health, strength, and vitality, and remind me that my body is a divine body and all is well, no matter the environment, the exposure, my genetic makeup, or what happened yesterday, all is well. Oh, I still get goosebumps saying that. And what that becomes is like the opposite vibration of what is happening. Because when we write statements like this, our words are very, very important. And so initially when I was writing the first ones, it gave radiation the power. Like it was like, I had to keep rewriting it until it became exposure to radiation confirms my body's natural ability. So that every time I'm exposed to radiation, it's a confirmation for me that my body maintains radiant health, strength, and vitality, and it reminds me that my body is a divine body and all is well, no matter the environment, the exposure, my genetic makeup, or what happened yesterday, all is well. And these words became the only medication I took. Not that there's medication for this, but that became my everything. It was my therapy. It was my antibiotic. It was my everything. And that's what I would jump to. The minute I felt it, I would jump to this until I committed it to memory. So basically, I started to tell myself something, tell it the opposite of what it was experiencing, because we have a collective understanding and a collective belief, and rightly so, that radiation does what radiation does. It's not untrue that radiation can cook our food and that radiation over time can cook our bodies. None of this is untrue. However, there is a higher truth, and the higher truth is that you can raise the vibration of your cells so that they can act outside of time and space. Radiation is an energy, well, so are we, right? So when I was trying to work on it from the physical level, there's nothing they can tell us. Well, yes, we can sleep in a canopy or move to the country, don't use technology, and, try and eat, the best food you can. They've got the mats like the MRS 2000 mats. You lay on them, it brings the body back to the Schumann resonance. All of these things are fantastic things. All of these things are good things. But the way I started to think of them was I started to think that I wrote it out somewhere once, that sort of, if you think of it like swimming, right? Most people don't even know that radiation is not good for you, right? So they're going in every day, right? Think of it like, if you had a small child and you're by the ocean, children don't know how dangerous it is. So they'll go in and highly likely they will drown, right? So even if they don't understand how dangerous it is, as parents, we will give them floats. Because we know that if they enter with or without us, the float is going to keep them alive. But what we're going to do is we're going to teach them how to swim, right? So all of this technology, the things you can wear, whether it's what you eat or what you wear or what we sleep in or what we lay on, or all of these things that they're coming out with now, I think of them as floats. They're important, right? But we've got to learn how to swim. What I have done is learn how to swim. That's how I think of it. I learned how to swim. I didn't have a lot of floats. I couldn't afford the floats. And now that I can afford the floats, I don't need the floats, right? And so I remember at some point when I started to get well, someone offering me an MRS 2000 mat for free. And I thought, now, why didn't you offer me that for free when I was sick? When I really would have said, yes, please, anything to help me, right? They offered it to me when I was clearly getting better, because I now became a good salesperson for the mat. The mat is a good thing. It does what it does. But what I said was, I didn't use one to get well. And in fact, I couldn't afford one to get well. So no, I cannot sell MRS 2000 mats. So yeah, it's that is what I was able to do. I was able to change my body's relationship to its exposure to radiation using the power of the mind.
Now that is a fantastic story. I've been listening and really thinking, and yes, you're right, that all the floats, the MRS 4000 or yes, 2000 4,000. Or whatever, 4,000 I think, it's about $4,000, and it's all part of a network marketing arrangement. There's something called the QRS, which is about half the price, and it works very well also. But once again, everybody wants to run home and lie on their MRS or QRS.
Exactly. What if the grid goes down? If the grid goes down, they will be so afraid. It's interesting because while I'm really certain that there are forces out there that mean us harm. Do you know what I mean? The stuff we're reading, just the stuff that they're putting in the environment, the stuff that they're putting in our food, the stuff that they're exposing us to, and we're willingly, like lambs to slaughter, we're going there. But what's really interesting to me, and I think those forces know this, is they are hurting us on two ends. One, by putting it in there, and two, by creating fear of it in there. So they're feeding us poison, and then they're also feeding us the fear about the poison, when really we have power over both of those things. So in the end, we can come out on top, no matter what they feed us, no matter what they expose us to. If we can work, and especially if collectively we start to do this, oh my God, do you know what I mean? It should have no power over us. Not because it is not what it is, but because we have within us something far more powerful. We have consciousness. We are energy beings. So we can work from the body. And so sometimes when people would come to me for counseling, they always wanted something to do. Like, what should I do about this? What should I do about it? What should I do about it? There was very little that I was able to do. Now I could say, yes, get a canopy. A canopy is a float. Do you know what I mean? But it's a good float, and it's an organic float. So you know what? You can go anywhere with a canopy. But there's other things that, they're man-made, man-built, beautiful technology. Yes, use those, but learn how to swim. Use the floats, but learn how to swim. Use an MRS. Heck, if you can afford an MRS 2000, get one in your basement. You lay on it, all your children lay on it. I don't even know what the Schumann resonance is anymore. But if you can find it on your machine, get back there. However, learn how to float. Don't become attached. Don't become dependent. Because if ever the grid goes down, you need to know that you can stand on your own 2 feet. And so use them to get well, or use them whatever you need to do. Because I don't speak ill of these things. We just have within us something that's infinitely more powerful and sustainable once we've developed the ability.
The Schumann resonances are 0 to 40 hertz. Those are the natural electromagnetic waves of the Earth's own electromagnetic field.
I think, sorry to cut you off there. I think the Schumann resonance, at one point it was somewhere between 7 and 8 hertz. It had been that for thousands of years. And I remember years ago reading that it was going up, but I remember at one point reading that it was almost at 13. Which is fine. The planet's vibration raising is a good thing, and we're supposed to be raising our vibration with it. However, we have now introduced so much man-made technology that I believe it's hard to find somewhere that still has the Schumann resonance. You know, it's hard for them to find a 0 point.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, the Schumann resonances hover between 7 and 12, yes, but they peak occasionally, and those are tolerable by organic living creatures. They peak at 32 to 40 during certain equatorial thunderstorms. So that's just as high as they tend to go, and that's only on occasion. But they hover between 7 and 12, and so do brain waves and body. The body itself is basically a 7-8 hertz system.
Except now we're walking around, I don't even know what the body is now. We're all just vibrating. Like literally what it felt like in my body was that my cells were oscillating really fast. Like it's actually a physical sensation of oscillation. You know, sometimes I felt like, you know, those Christmas tree lights that flash on and off? It's like my body felt like that sometimes, like I was just wired all of the time. Grounding becomes the only thing you crave is grounding. You want to dig a hole in the earth and just bury yourself in it. You know, so grounding is very, very important.
Yeah, and that's because also when you speak of body voltage, I've done a lot of delving into this.
Yes.
The Earth's negative charge, the Schumann resonances are said to be caused by lightning striking the Earth approximately 200 times a second, and that's all over the Earth. So there is an electron flow in the ground. It's a very mild electron flow. It's the mildest of currents, and it's carried by the minerals in the soil, in the Earth's topography, and the water. And over the millennia, this mild electron flow has become a life stimulus, and living things are dependent on it because ultimately life itself is the exchange of electricity on the cellular level. So within the cells, you have the mitochondria. Those are little organelles, and their job is to use oxygen to make adenosine triphosphate, which is the fuel of the cell. So this is called cellular respiration. And it's very important. The mitochondria are grabbing for electrons. But since we've been off the ground, we no longer even wear our leather shoes and walk to school or work on dirt paths, dirt roads. We are now in rubber shoes primarily. We are living in raised buildings. We are sleeping on second stories. And the negative charge, which is so vital to living, is on the ground. So every time you ascend, elevation itself puts more positive charge on the cells. So just to explain in terms of blood, when red blood cells are coated with negative charge, meaning when you're close to the ground, even in elevation, you don't even have to be touching it. But when you're close to the ground, that's why you like to sleep in the basement, Veronica. So your red blood cells have zeta potential. They have negative charge on their surfaces and they repel one another. Repulsion, or repelling, I guess, by the cells, the RBCs, causes your blood to flow. It gives you thin, very liquidy blood. The moment you elevate and the moment you get in these electrical current fields, the electromagnetic fields around radio frequencies, 5 minutes on a cordless phone or a cell phone will thicken your blood and make it coagulate. And Magda Havas does a really good video on this. So when the RBCs clump together, there's a term for it called rouleau formation. What they're really doing, they're very primitively stacking up like coins because they want to get through the blood vessels, but they're all stuck. And they can't travel because that negative charge isn't there. But when you go lower toward the ground, when you actually touch the ground, when you walk on the ground, your blood thins out because all those electrons from the earth start coming into your body by way of your skin. And we are conductive. We're, very high percentage of water. So that's really the science behind it. But many people still seek the earth. If you go to the beach, you'll see that most people on the beach are walking barefoot. The first thing they do is kick off their shoes. Yes, you are absolutely right. And I am very, very kind of astonished by the simplicity of what you said and what you've taught me and what I think people can do with this information. You're right. If we could just understand our own, it's not even a defense. It's more of an ascension, right?
Yes. It's like what I feel like I've done is I've raised my vibration beyond that which can be affected in that way by radiation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so radiation was your teacher, just like the pendulum told you.
Yes. There's something I say to people because I meet people regularly who talk about this, and most of the time they are expressing great amounts of fear. They're afraid because they work in a place where there's Wi-Fi, or it's in their home, or their husband won't turn it off, or they're very, very afraid. And I say to them all the time that radiation is not out to hurt anybody. Radiation is simply trying to ground itself. And it's going to choose the paths of least resistance. And in any environment, that's usually water and metal. So if I'm in a room, I'm one of the paths of least resistance that radiation is going to be attracted to. It's just trying to get back into the ground, right? So it's like, don't be afraid of it, because the fear of radiation could harm you before the radiation does. Once you know about this, expose yourself to information where you can make changes. Don't just be afraid of radiation and then continue work as usual. Once you know what you know, make little changes. Whether it's on the physical level or on the energetic level. But don't just walk around afraid of radiation and talking about how bad it is, because that will kill you before the radiation does.
Very interesting. Now, the radiation is on the spectrum of electromagnetic waves.
Yes.
And there are different oscillations. And each time they put out a new generation of phones, 3G, 4G, 5G, they're actually throwing out faster frequencies.
Yes.
And the performance ability of your device, the faster it is, the more the frequency, the oscillation of the wave. And I gave a talk called Living in the Manhattan Project. It was about radiation biology. Mm-hmm. And in that talk, I explained, it's on YouTube, that when you look at a waveform, we're really seeing squiggles on a piece of paper. We're looking at it as a two-dimensional thing, but it's not. It's more like a slinky. It is a three-dimensional helical form. And the oscillations are effectively a drill. Mm-hmm. So when the oscillations are coming at you with those very high frequencies, mm-hmm. they are literally acting like a drill. They're going brrr, right into your cells, and they're agitating the cells, shattering the cell membranes. That's what causes the myalgia, the pain in your muscles, because the cell membranes are critical to the functions of the cell, to the respiration. When the myoglobin, I just researched this and wrote a newsletter on myoglobin, when the muscle protein called myoglobin starts moving into the bloodstream, it doesn't belong there. The protein in the blood is hemoglobin. So as your cell barriers start to break down, the wrong things get out and the wrong things get in, and that causes all kinds of damage and agitation in your body, which registers as weakness and pain. Yeah. So it's, when you look at the biology of it and the biochemistry, there's oodles of stuff to learn, but you don't have to know all this to feel it, which is what you went through.
Yes. It's good though when we learn it. I mean, at this point, from where I sit now, I would say even more important than understand how it's breaking down our body is to skip that and go to the information where you can understand how you heal the body. You know, Esther Hicks, I know one of the things she said is that sometimes we stay healthier when we don't go to the doctor, because sometimes going and finding out what's wrong just speeds up the deterioration. And how often some of her best clients are those who have been told there's nothing else we could do for you. You know, they just they're not even trying to find what's wrong anymore, or how the doctors can heal them. But most importantly is the idea that once you go and they tell you what is wrong and they show you how and why, and this is what's happening here, and this is what's breaking, and this is what's that once you have a visual of it, it actually grounds it more into our physical mind and body, right? And so even if we don't at this point understand the science of what is happening when we are exposed, I think it may require due diligence to go and understand how we heal the body. I think that is the most important information right now for people, is how we can override this. You know, I was doing a lot of speaking about what happened to me a couple of years ago, which I was always very happy to do. But I stopped, and I stopped for two reasons. One was because I didn't want for them to sort of say, well, she got better. Why can't everybody else get better? Like, do you know what I mean? And think that I was just an example of what everybody else could do, which I am. But it's not that simple, because they tend to diminish the importance of educating people because somebody got better. And so I didn't want to bring that to the table. But also because what I wanted to be able to do is, if I was going to share the fact that this is making thousands of people ill, and it is. What I wanted to be able to follow that with was the power we had to reverse those symptoms.
Yeah, that's very unique, actually, Veronica. So were you able, or have you been able to help other people who've been injured in the way that you were? Are they able to take this same path? Have you witnessed that?
I have witnessed, because I don't have access to them. Like, if it was up to me, I would have had a lovely center here where they could come and stay. I did have a couple of people that came and stayed at my home during really, really, really rough times. And my basement here was better than anything they were exposed. In fact, my living room was practically better than anything they were exposed to. So I have done that. And then it's a lot of conversation that we have. People often shift just from having a conversation with me. And for them just to have the understanding that that they have a choice, that they're not dying, that you can actually live through this, helps. I don't always have access to them after we have our initial conversation, which could last 2 to 5 hours. There's someone I know who calls this stage the hunter stage. The hunter stage is when people usually call me. And the hunter stage is when you've given up your home. You literally can't sleep in your home, but you have nowhere else that's really safe to sleep. So you're sleeping anywhere you can. You're sleeping at friends' homes. You're sleeping at your home if you have to, but it's like you're on the run. It feels just like it sounds. And so when they call me, I'm like one shot in the dark. And the difference I make for them is them understanding what is possible. And so, you know, through tears, through lots of communication, they get it, but they're still in the hunter stage. Before this happened to me, I had spent a great amount of time reading material that was sharing what was possible. It was just who I was and what I did. And so I had a lot of that under my belt. I had a lot of very strong alternative beliefs. And so when the time came for me to use that, it wasn't a very long distance for me to snap back and for me to go, oh, right, remember that? And to actually use it and to trust it. I mean, I didn't get better right away. I still shed tears over the next year. I still had moments where I'm like, okay, am I really freaking crazy? Is this really working or not? Or am I just fooling myself? And then I jump right back in and just bring my vibration back up to where I know it needed to be in order to stay well. Because sometimes just having a conversation about this with someone who I'd run into, a friend on the street, And they'd have heard, oh, I hear you went through this thing. And I'd start telling them, my whole vibration would go right back. It was amazing to watch it happen. And it happened so repeatedly. But this was when I would still tell the story from the place of victim. When it was like, oh my God, yeah, then he did this, and then he put this in, and I would tell the story just as any victim might tell a story, right? What would happen is I would come home and I would be like over the bathtub throwing up from just, I can't even tell you the toxicity that would be going through my system just because I told that story to someone on a corner for an hour, right? And I watched it happen so many times. I was like, okay, you need to stop telling that story. And I had to stop telling that story until I got to a place where I have no regrets about what I went through. And if I had to go through it all again to get to where I am now, I would go through it all again. It helps when you know where you're going, much harder when you don't know. But I have no regrets that it happened. It was my teacher. And I've just learned so much. And at this point, I am less afraid of radiation than anybody I know. Even though I've had so much experience, I know what it can do firsthand, but I'm less afraid than anybody I know. Simply because I also know what my body can do firsthand, right? So if I go out and I find myself somewhere that I'm highly exposed, by the time I'm going home that evening, my body will tell me. And often what it is the chronic fatigue. That's the one that says you've been exposed a lot. And basically, I don't feel like I have chronic fatigue. What I feel like is I have something in my system that says you've been exposed, shut down right now. Go to sleep. I don't care where you are, just go to sleep because you need to repair. And so that's basically how I take it, is my body saying you need to go to sleep, you need to go into alpha state, you need to repair. And so if I come home after a huge exposure, whether it's 2 p.m. or 2 a.m, if I sit on the couch, my body will fall asleep mid-conversation. But the rest of the time, that's not happening. I don't need a lot of sleep the rest of the time. And that happens less and less as my body becomes less and less sensitive. And so that's just my body saying, go to sleep, repair. You need to go into repair mode, but I will come home. And back when it was more so, if I came home and I knew I was super exposed, I would actually drink a glass of the brine water before I went to bed. Right. And then sometimes by the following morning, symptoms gone. I'm back to normal. Sometimes, depending on what it is, they might, make a couple of days before I actually feel my fully vital self yet. But that's not a problem. That's, it's like, it's not a big deal,
So you're really not fearing further progressive cumulative damage, I guess. And what I wanted to say also was about the affirmation that you wrote. You rewrote that a few times to get the language right so that it properly empowered you and didn't give radiation a power. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. I didn't want to give anything power but myself. Do you know what I mean? I didn't even want to say, if I get myself somewhere, if I do this, if I get exposed, then drinking water. I didn't want to give anything power but my own mind. And that does that.
Yeah, so this is quite incredible. I'm sitting here. I just want the listeners to know that when I set out to interview Veronica, she mentioned that she had come out the other side of this, so to speak, and I didn't know at all what she had done. So it's been a learning experience for me just to conduct the interview and be with you in this hour and a half. It's an amazing story. I really am enthralled.
I'm excited to be able to share it this way because I share it with people one-on-one on a regular basis, but I've not been able to share just this whole other area of it, just how I've recovered and the tools that I've used, because I really think that what is happening on this planet is meant to be our greatest teacher, and that those of us who pay attention and use it this way, and I know a lot of people are, I'm sure, in different areas. Do you know what I mean? Like anyone who recovers from cancer, they've done similar things in different ways. Anyone who recovers from anything has had to do that in different ways. But this, for me, what makes this one stand out for me is the fact that it is now energy affecting energy. We are being bombarded with something we can't see anymore. Straight up energy. And I think the most powerful thing to combat it is going to be our energy.
You are right. I'm really amazed. It's an amazing, amazing story with an incredible discovery embedded in it, So what an honor. Thank you, Veronica, so much for telling me all this and telling my listeners in just the way that you did. Because, like I said, my instincts about you were completely right. You are deep. You are completely, in this center of your own space, and that's how you found a way through the wilderness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's what we're all here to do, is to go back to center and find our way through the wilderness to a place where we can live with health and integrity.
So, Veronica, this So Grounded website, SOWE grounded.com, are people able to communicate with you through that website?
I believe you can. I'm sure you can, actually, that you can email me from that website. I actually haven't looked at it in a long while. I should check it out if it needs any updates. But you'll find, one of the things to really pay attention to is that, check out the books that are listed there. Now, some of them are older books, and I know there's a lot of new books now, where you can expand your education about what is possible in the body. Right? And then there's a page there that's got some quotations or affirmations for you to contemplate. Check those out and really start to expose yourself on a regular basis to that kind of information. That alone will raise your vibration, and then the rest is up to you.
Well, thank you. I have to say, I've heard a lot and learned a lot myself about raising the vibration, but there's a part of me that's always been a skeptic. I mean, I've really had my heels dug in on this, and I've wondered, how does a person really do this? But you're perhaps the first person that I've been convinced about because of the journey that you've been through, and I think you've really done it. And we have a lot to learn from you. So thank you so much, Veronica, for this absolutely amazing show. I'm very, very blown away.
Well, you are welcome, and thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation.
It was my pleasure, and people are going to really benefit from it. So I will be in touch. I have some ideas for you as well, people that I think you might want to converse with who are all over this themselves.
Okay.
But yeah, that's it. This is a language. You've learned a new language. You're speaking a language, and it's a language of evolution.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks, and I will be in touch.
Thank you, and be well.
Hi, this is Sophia, encouraging you to visit my online store, avatarproducts.com, where you will find a wonderful thing called magnesium cream. Magnesium is a mineral we desperately need due to the fact that it alkalinizes our blood, and, another bonus, it relaxes muscles. So all you athletes or computer addicts with workout soreness or stiff necks, use a little magnesium cream on a regular basis and feel the kinks getting looser. Magnesium is the dominant ion in the cell and facilitates hundreds of biochemical exchanges. Using it transdermally through the skin means you can put it right on those chronic pain spots, and it still gets absorbed to work systemically. A 3-ounce tube is easy to carry around and a great gift for aging parents, introducing them to natural chemistry for rapid pain relief for arthritis and joints, and great overall cellular support. It's at avatarproducts.com in the Sun and Skin section.